Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Patch and Play stream of June 2026. My name is Jimmy, aka Perceptes, and this is a stream that I do about once a week and have been for a few months, where we hang out and do some modular patching together. So it usually takes a bit of time after the stream begins before people start to trickle in. And so I've started to begin these streams with like a sort of an explanation for any newcomers about what exactly is going on here. But it looks like we've maybe got some people already today. Ryan, welcome to the stream. Good to see you. So let me give a quick sort of overview of what the stream is about and what this all is for anyone who is clicking it out of curiosity and may not have experience with modular synthesis. So modular synthesis is a type of music making where rather than buying a single synthesizer like you typically think of as a big box with a piano keyboard, you're creating your own custom synthesizer by assembling a group of individual modules, each which perform a specific function that is part of a larger system. And they're all plugged into power behind the panel here. And then you use patch cables, which are these little 3.5 millimeter sort of audio cables, to plug into these jacks, and electricity over these cables is how the modules communicate with each other to create sort of a larger system. So what you're looking at here is a collection of modules that I've assembled and designed for my purposes. By design, I don't mean that I made the modules, just that out of many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of possible modules for this system, I selected the ones that do what I am interested in doing and figured out where to put them such that they make sense for my workflow, and pack them into these two cases made by Intellijel. And this is how I make music with this stuff. So two modular cases and then one smaller one here with a few extra miscellaneous ones that kind of just don't fit in the larger case. And then this little rectangular box here is called the Oxy 1, and it's a music sequencer that plays very well with modular. You can see there's this one black cable here that's connected to this module here. And this allows me to sequence 8 gate sequences and eight CV sequences. So essentially on-off sort of start-stop values. And then CV is like continuously variable signals for things like pitch and modulation. And all of that information goes across this cable, and then I can patch out from this little module here those different signals into the different destinations. So we may or may not use this today, but that's the general layout of what we're looking at. So Patch and Play is a series that I started to do some sort of off-the-cuff patching. The videos that I publish to my channel are all either musical performances or sort of more prepared educational videos about music technology, generally modular synthesis. So I'm doing things where I do a deep dive on a specific module to explain everything about it, or I give techniques about how to use certain patches together. But this stream, because it's live, is really about the sort of lack of preparedness. So I think a little bit in advance about what I might do during a given stream, but my goal is really for it to be kind of interactive with whoever is actually here live during the stream. Because in addition to having fun, I also want to be educational, and I want to help people understand what this is all about and kind of see a little bit of the behind the scenes of how the thought process happens and the workflow for how do you start with a blank slate and turn it into something. Because when you see sort of the finished product where it's just, a big spaghetti mess of cables plugged into a bunch of stuff and you're hearing sounds, but you don't really understand how it got to that point. I think this sort of process of starting from scratch can be pretty educational to see not only how it gets to that final point, but also sort of the decision making and the thought process behind how you go at each step. I'd also really like to sort of focus what we do based on what people are interested in seeing. So even though I have usually an idea of sort of where I'll go if there are no questions, I would always prefer to have any plans that I might have detoured by questions from the live audience. So if there's specific modules that you want to focus on, or questions you have about how does this work, or how does that work, or workflow questions about building a case, how to select which modules to use, why you might pick one module over another, anything that you're interested in. I may not have a perfect answer for it because I'm not, the most experienced person with modular in the world. But I'll do my best to sort of give my thoughts, my advice, and whatever information I have about the topic. So let's see. Ryan is just getting into modular. Looking forward to learning about patching. Ah, very cool. Yeah. So Ryan is coming into the hobby to learn electronics. That's interesting, and also definitely a big part of modular for some people. That almost all of these are made by very small companies. A few of them are a little bit larger, but most of the time, a company that makes modules is not more than 1 or 2 people, maybe a little bit more sometimes, but they're all very small companies. And a lot of people who are into electronics make their own modules. So if you have an electrical engineering background, or it's something that you can learn, in addition to assembling your own case from existing modules, you can actually make these yourself. Some of them are fully analog, so you're just working with entirely sort of the circuit design and building the physical components. And some of these are digital in that they're essentially sort of like a computer chip that's just inside one of these little boxes. And most of what you're doing is writing software for the chip that's inside the module. And then there's a little bit of sort of the physical component to connect that module's features to the user interface that people use. Personally, I don't have an electrical engineering background, so I only understand sort of the very basics about sort of the physical world aspect of all of this. So I won't be able to answer a lot of specific questions about sort of the DIY part of this. But I do know that it is something that for some people is more fun than the actual music making itself. So in addition to building these, if like for people that want to create something of their own, a lot of companies sell DIY kits of modules. So you can get one that's pre-assembled, but you can also get one where they just give you the pieces and sort of an instruction manual about how to put it together. And if you have some skills in soldering and a few sort of maybe related tasks, then you can actually build all of the pieces together so that the physical module that you have is something that you actually constructed yourself from the physical building blocks. And I know some people really, really enjoy that process. I might do it someday, if anything, just to get the experience of doing it, to talk about it with other people who do it. But personally, it's not the part of this that attracted me to it. And so, yeah, I haven't done it yet. Everything that you see here is something that I have bought sort of off the shelf. So yeah, let's see for anyone else here. Yeah. So, today what I was thinking about doing is focusing on Sealegs, which is, this, let me zoom in, this module in the bottom right corner of the light colored case. This is primarily a delay module from Intellijel, the same company that makes the cases themselves. I realized that most of the time that I use Sealegs, which is pretty often, I use it in probably most of my patches, I use it in a very rudimentary way that is not really taking advantage of all of the things that Sealegs can do. I use it in kind of a basic send effect where I'm adding, a little bit of delay to a few of the different tracks in my composition. And usually I use like a dotted eighth note sort of delay time and kind of a similar sound each time. And I'm not doing a lot of modulation of the different parameters of Sealegs. And as you can see from just the layout of this thing, it's got a lot of controls. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with it. And I don't usually use it for sort of sound design where I'm using it as sort of a creative effect. It's usually kind of the layer that I kind of slap on the end at the end of chain to just kind of give a nice sort of sound to everything. So I was thinking about kind of exploring more of it, more Sealegs as a creative tool today. And I'm not an expert in this by any means, which is, as usual, part of the point of these streams is that it's a kind of learn as we go sort of thing. But we'll see what we can get out of it. So Ryan has replicas of plates, rings, marbles, and clouds. Ah, yeah. So I've got 3 of the 4 of those. Plates, okay, we're on the right case. Yeah, plates, rings, marbles is down here, and I don't have clouds, but beads is similar. Beads is kind of like the second generation version of the same idea. Some people prefer one to the other. A lot of people like clouds better than beads, even though it's older. So I don't have clouds, but a lot of the same concepts will still apply between the two of them. But yeah, these modules that all look kind of similar here are from Mutable Instruments, which is probably the most popular Eurorack company. Doesn't exist anymore, but almost all of their modules are extremely popular, and probably, other than maybe Intellijel and Make Noise, are probably the two most. All right, and I guess also Derpfa, of course, who invented Eurorack, which is this format of modular synthesis, are probably like the most commonly found in people's cases. So yeah, we can get into any of those other modules today. If there are any specific questions or any way that might be interesting to integrate them. But yeah, Sealegs is great, and Intellijel has released a couple of other modules more recently than Sealegs that use sort of the same form factor and are clearly based on sort of some of the same physical designs and probably share a lot of components. So that after Sealegs, there was Multigrain, which is a sampler, a granular sampler that is exactly the same size as this, but with like a different panel layout and different kind of purpose. And then very recently they released Swells, which is essentially the reverb equivalent of this. So this is like a delay with a little bit of reverb, and Swells is reverb with a little bit of delay. And I might get Swells and or Multigrain eventually. Probably not Multigrain, because it doesn't really do something that I am super interested in. And Swells, I've from the examples I've heard of it, it sounds pretty good, but I'm not super interested in modular reverbs, because I find that reverb is not an effect that I want to modulate very often. And if I want just like a basic reverb, then kind of the single control reverb that's built into Sealegs is often good enough for me. And then I also have, in my little pod here, I have the black stereo reverb from Erica Synths, which is also kind of just a fairly straightforward kind of bread and butter reverb that is pretty good. And I also like to use effects pedals. So in my right case, this little module on the top right is sort of an input-output that allows me to integrate guitar pedals with my modular setup. So I can send a signal out of the modular into a guitar pedal and then process it there and then bring it back into the case to bring it into my sort of final mix. And I've got the Strymon Big Sky MX, which is a very fancy sort of multi-algorithm digital reverb. And oftentimes that's what I'll use if I want like a dedicated reverb, more so than anything in the modular case. But yeah, for those who are really interested in reverb specifically, Swell seems to be very popular. I got a chance to check one out in person recently, and I can see why people like it. So maybe they'll end up with it at some point. Who knows? I have to have a sip of tea because oftentimes I just keep keep speaking throughout the stream, and I forget to drink my tea before it gets cold. So I'm going to try to make a point to actually stop talking and drink a bit. Afterlife Registry, welcome to the stream. Just ordered Multigrain. Cool. Well, if you return to a stream after you've tried it a bit, I'd be happy to hear what you think about it. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely cool, and I know it's been very well received. I think one reason why it appeals to me a little less, and this is actually timely because there was a video from Jeremy on the channel Red Means Recording just a day or two ago about accessibility problems in Eurorack. And he was talking a lot about sort of interface design and this type of module like Multigrain, where it's a digital module with a huge number of features, but, obviously because it's physical, a finite user interface. So there's only so many knobs, there's only so many sliders, there's only so many buttons, and they pack a lot of additional features into combinations of buttons and knob turns, which, unless you use it all the time, can be kind of esoteric and the type of thing where you have to constantly refer to the manual to figure out how to use it. And I'm kind of increasingly disliking that type of user interface. Something I've talked about a lot on the stream before is how aesthetics and user interface are a big part for me of like how I choose which modules to buy. It's not 100% about how does it sound or what is its feature set. A lot of it is about, does this click with the way my brain works? Like, does it seem intuitive? Is this something that I'm going to be able to use in a workflow that is satisfying to me? Or is it going to be something where I'm constantly scratching my head and looking for ways to use it and constantly having to open the manual to even remember how to approach it? And so I think increasingly I'm kind of leaning towards that type of module. So even if the effects are, or the features are really, really cool, it's kind of not what's driving my interest at this point. And of course that may change over time, especially right now where my cases are filled. And if I get anything new, then in order to use it, I necessarily have to swap something else out. I think if and when I get another large case that gives me extra space to put in more modules, then maybe I'll be a little less picky about what I try. But that's the way things are right now. Yes, as Ryan says, not really into menu diving, Mortal Kombat style patching. Yeah, I mean, menu diving meaning something where you have to do a lot of button presses, looking at a screen and going through sort of like a digital menu in order to access the features, as opposed to sort of a more simple analog module where you have a dedicated hardware control for each of the things that the module allows you to control. Generally, the sort of one knob per function, as we call it, is kind of the more popular style. And people often say that they don't like to do menu diving. But there are some modules that are, menu heavy, and some of them are quite successful. So it really depends on what it does and what a person's workflow is for using that, whether or not that's an acceptable trade-off. James Bond, welcome to the stream. Glad you could take some time out from being a spy to do some modular with me. On a non-modular front, the SP404 MK2 and Deluge suffer from the same problem. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a Eurorack specific problem. I mean, this is one of the things that I find really interesting about hardware music production. I'm not a UI designer, but I am a software developer. And so I think sometimes about the kind of the UI, or the user experience, essentially, that any software or hardware tool that regardless of its feature set, the UI is so critical in how it gets used and how effective it is. Because if you make something that's infinitely theoretically useful, but no one can understand it or can't use it in a way that's practical to them, then it might as well not have those fancy features. And so I just find it really interesting, sort of the design process of when coming up with something like this, where you've got physical controls and physical, patch points that can't be changed after the hardware has been manufactured. How do you come to a conclusion about where things should be placed and what should be exposed to the guts inside? I think it's a really interesting sort of intellectual question. And I mean, I guess it's a cross between intellect and sort of creativity, of kind of the problem solving and the art of how to make something usable and useful. Yeah, I suspect there's a lot of people that work in software that do this as a hobby. Question about how I'm getting the sounds onto the stream. So it's relatively simple. Because we haven't listened to any actual modular sounds yet, but let me just patch something in real quick so we can hear. So if I plug in an oscillator to my mixer, you should be able to hear that, and let me know how loud my voice is compared to the sound of the oscillator there, so that if we're listening to some music, you can still hear me. But this is my main mixer down in the right corner. This is Zermixa from Noise Engineering, and I plug all of the audio signals from my various modules into this, and then it's got one main output that is plugged in to the Intellijel, I think it's called Stereo IO, this module in the top right corner. And that thing has internal connections to 1/4-inch audio jacks on the back of the case. You can probably see in the top right corner, there's some black cables coming out of the top right of the right case with a couple of purple cable labels on them. And that's a stereo output of everything And that goes around the corner into my audio interface. And then I'm using OBS, the streaming software, to capture video from a camera overhead, the audio from the case mixed in, and the audio from my microphone, which of course is how you're hearing me. And that all gets mixed by the software that comes with the audio interface, which is a Scarlett 18i20, I think the third generation. And then everything else is composed with OBS, and OBS is what is ultimately streaming the video and the audio to YouTube. Do I control OBS with any modules? Homesick, welcome to the stream. No, I don't have any. So the only thing I control OBS with, I'm not sure if you can. Oh yeah, I guess you can see it on the screen, right where my hand is in the bottom right corner of the window. I use one of these Elgato Stream Decks that lets me switch between scenes, so I can press buttons here to change which scene is visible. And so I have obviously like the zoom out where you're seeing the full resolution of what the camera is capturing that shows the whole table. And then I can do a digital zoom on the left or the right case, which may allow you to get a little bit more in terms of it's, I don't know how clear it is, like if you can really read the text per se, but I think it's maybe a little bit easier to see if I'm focusing on a particular module. And then so I have a zoom in for the Oxy 1 and also for the small pod case on the right. I know ideally I would have multiple cameras so I could get a really sharp, high resolution image of each of these sort of smaller components that's on my desk. But cameras are expensive, and my setup is pretty nuts as it is. So maybe someday. And let me take a break to drink my tea. Yeah, Pamela's Pro Workout is actually entirely menu-based. That's this module on the far left here with the yellow button and the purple knob, or sorry, the blue knob. And this is a digital module that's entirely controlled by looking at what's on the screen and pressing the button, pressing the knob in, and turning the knob. I was actually concerned about that because I think this is actually... Well, I think maybe Plates is actually the most popular Eurorack module, but Pamela's Workout is very close to the top in terms of like, if you go on modulargrid.net, which is sort of the main website that people use to plan out their case layouts, it has a big database of all the modules that exist, and you can sort of drag and drop modules to figure out how you're going to arrange a case and figure out what its total power requirements are. It's great because they keep track of how many times, or how many case designs on the website across all users. How many times does any given module appear across all cases? And so they can give you a popularity ranking based on how many cases include a module. And Pamela's Pro Workout is very, very near the top. This is a module that's been revised a couple of times. So there was an original Pamela's Workout, and then there's Pamela's New Workout, which I think is the most common one. And then maybe 3 years ago, they released Pamela's Pro Workout, which is the most recent one. And all three of those are very popular and found in a lot of cases. Reason being is that they're just super flexible. They can do a lot of stuff, and they're really good as like a sort of a main clock source. So if you have like a primary tempo for your entire piece, you set it here, and then you patch clock signals out from these jacks to all of your different modules that need to be synchronized, and it kind of works as the brain of the system. And so this is entirely digital, and you navigate it entirely by turning the knob and pressing the buttons. And so it is by definition menu divey. And so it's kind of interesting that, like I was saying, people always say, oh, I don't like menu divey modules. And yet one of the most popular modules ever is entirely menu diving. And so I think it really, again, it comes down to the user experience. Like, is it a frustrating menu, or is it intuitive and easy to use? Is it quick to get to what you want? And I think Pam's interface is straightforward enough that you can kind of figure out how to use it even without ever looking at a manual. And because you have a screen, like, it can be very dynamic in terms of what data it displays to you. Whereas, things with no screen, the module has to be very clear about what each jack and what each control does. And when you get into these digital modules that have like multiple modes, where maybe you press a button and then suddenly a knob does something different than it did before, that becomes a much more difficult sort of design challenge. And like, how do you communicate to the user what the module is doing, and how can the user know kind of like what the state of the module is at any given moment. That becomes very difficult. Yeah, 100%. I think PAM is like, I actually find it interesting that PAM is less popular on modular grid than a few others. I don't see how it's not number one, because almost everyone has it. Let me check if there's any other questions I missed. Do you think it's worth routing a DAW through OBS for audio capture? Well, worth it is I'm not sure how I would answer whether it's worth it or not. For my case, since I'm not doing anything to the audio signals other than mixing my voice and the single stereo out here, there's only 2 levels that I need to balance against each other, and I'm not adding any effects to either of them. Like I'm not adding a compressor or anything to my voice. And you can tell me if that seems like it's working well, but I felt like so far I haven't had the need to do that. But yes, theoretically I could run it through an additional piece of software and maybe use a VST or something to further process or mix the audio and then just capture the audio from there. But I haven't had a specific reason to do that. If you're thinking about setting up a live stream that's anywhere similar to this, but you have more complex needs, which would require a plugin, then that might make sense. And then you could do the mixing of your multiple audio signals in the software that you would normally use for mixing, which may actually be a better workflow. Yes, ALM does have pretty solid menus. I mean, I guess, do I have any other ALM modules? I actually don't, now that I think about it, which is interesting because I think they're also one of the sort of bigger companies in terms of sort of, I'm not sure if market share is the right word, but just sort of like their general level of respect in the community and the number of modules they produce. Like they make a lot of different stuff, and I think their work is generally very well received. But I think PAM is actually the only one that was like, I need this for what I want to do. And everything else that I've looked at is kind of like, this is cool, but not exactly for me, or there's some kind of equivalent from another company that is like kind of a better choice for my use case. And again, with infinite money and infinite physical space, there's a lot of modules that I would be interested to try, but it's just an issue of priorities, essentially. We had a question from Ryan about what does branches and stages do? Let me make sure I'm zoomed in on the right case. So branches is this one right here with the red knob and the blue knob. This is the oldest mutable instruments module that I own. And it's what is referred to as a Bernoulli gate. So you can kind of think of it as a random probability module, specifically for triggers. So it has 2 identical channels. The top knob and the bottom knob and the 4 jacks are exactly the same layout, and you get two identical channels. You send a trigger signal into the input, and then each time a trigger is detected on that input jack, it'll do essentially like a coin flip internally of probability. And it has a 50% chance of deciding to send that trigger out of out A or out of out B, but never both at the same time. So you can use it to probabilistically split a trigger from one source to 2 destinations. And then what the knob does is it biases the coin flip. So when you have the knob centered at noon, there's a 50% chance that either A or B will be chosen as the output. And as you turn the knob in a direction, it makes the output in that direction more likely to be chosen. So if I turn the knob all the way to the left, every trigger on the input will go out of the out of the A output. And so it's no longer random. It's deterministic that it will always be A. And then as I back it off towards noon, we'll start to increasingly get B as the output until we go fully clockwise, and then only B will ever be triggered. And then the 4th jack, P, is CV control of the position of this knob. And it's got a few other modes that it can operate in with that button, but that's the basic gist of what it's used for. And so it's pretty simple. And it's funny, actually, before I had branches, I had this one. This is Twigs, which is a clone of branches made by a company called CalSynth that does good clones of mutable instruments modules. Because mutable instruments is also notable in that all of their designs are open source. with the exception of beads, which was the last mutable instruments module. Everything else, the schematics and the source code for the digital modules are all open source. And so other companies can make functionally identical copies of the modules, even though mutable instruments doesn't exist anymore. So I had this one actually before the real branches, and you can see it looks a little bit different. And this one actually has 4 channels instead of 2. The jacks do the same thing. You can see there's 4 jacks per channel, and it uses sliders for the probability instead of potentiometers. But what I discovered is that I very rarely use more than 1 channel of branches at a time. And so I absolutely did not need 4 channels. And Twigs is actually 2 HP larger than the original branches. And so it, when I was just kind of trying to Jenga my setup together to make everything fit, I was off by like 2 HP at one point. And I was like, you know what? I would rather have the extra 2 HP of space for my case than have these extra channels of probability that I never use. So I still have Twigs, and I can put it in my small pod case if for whatever reason I need a bunch more channels of that. But that situation has never come up. And then, as you can clearly tell from looking at my cases, the aesthetics of modules are valuable to me. And so having this kind of row of original mutable instruments modules next to each other looks really nice. And I like that better than and you can also see that the panel of Twigs is white as opposed to silver. And so the colors don't quite match, which doesn't make any functional difference, but it just kind of bothered me. And I didn't realize that when I first ordered it. I didn't realize that it wasn't silver, that it was actually like that kind of matte white. There was another question about a module. Stages. I won't go into a lot of detail about this unless you have specific questions, because this is a really deep module that I could talk for 45 minutes about easily. But this is an envelope generator, more or less. It's called, the label on it calls it a segment generator. And the idea is that it's kind of like the building blocks for envelopes and LFOs. If you think of an envelope as essentially a mathematical function that produces a voltage that changes over time in some specific pattern. It goes up, it goes down, it stays at a particular value for like a duration of milliseconds or seconds. And then if you loop that so that it starts again as soon as it ends the sort of sequence of ups and downs, then that's essentially what an LFO is just a repeating cyclical signal. And so stages is about giving you individual control of those building blocks. So one of these, there's 6 identical channels with these vertical columns, and each one of these sliders and knobs and jacks controls one stage in an envelope. So that stage can be either the rise, like an attack of an envelope, or the hold portion, or like a sustain of an sort of typical ADSR. It can be a decay, a release, and then it's got different modes for doing other things. And it has some like secret modes, so you can use it as an oscillator, you can use it as a step sequencer, you can use it as a sample and hold, and it's got a really interesting design. I personally always say this whenever it comes up. Stages is 100% my favorite module in Eurorack. Not necessarily because I use it the most often, but just because I think its design is the most brilliant. It's simple, but the use cases are vast, and the way in which you control what it does based on what jacks are plugged into where, sometimes referred to as patch programmability, is just really, really clever, and I think is like the perfect example of what is interesting about modular as opposed to making something like this in software in a computer. So I can go into more detail if you have more specific questions, but that's the general gist of what Stages does. Hey, Tyler, good to see you. Appreciate you hanging out so often. Tyler, you want to try PAM with the Axon 2 expander for the 2 buttons. Yeah, so PAM has a couple of different expanders. I have one of them. This one is called PPEXP1, PAMless Pro Expander 1, and this adds some additional outputs that are at fixed values. So I don't know if you can read the text at this resolution, but PAM itself has 8 outputs that are all configurable, so you control what sort of signal comes out of each one of those by going through the menus and sort of configuring it. But the expander, the output jacks on the expander have fixed clock signals. So there's like a 1x, 2x, 4x, and then there's a divide by 4 and a divide by 16. And then there's also a sort of clock and run dedicated output that you can use to sync to other gear. And there's also a stop output so that you can use this sort of as a reset for any sort of sequencer that needs to know when playback of the master clock has been stopped. And so I find this really useful for sort of basic clock multiples that I almost always use. Like I very often use the either 1, 2, or 4x jacks to clock Sealegs to the master tempo. Sealegs works based off a 16th note clock. So I take the 4x output into Sealegs, and now Sealegs delay is synced to my tempo, and I have not used up any of the configurable outputs on the main PAM module that I can use for more complex signals. It's really handy. The other expander that Tyler is talking about, again, is called Axon, and I think there might be 2 versions of it. But it adds additional buttons. So like this yellow button that you can use, which is basically just start stop for the sort of master clock. Like when I press this, you'll see the lights start flashing. That's how you start the clock running and then stop it again. And then there's a couple of other combinations where like if you hold the button down while turning the knob, it will sort of move to the same menu page on an adjacent channel. The other expander adds 2 additional buttons, and you can program in the menu what the buttons are mapped to. So if there are certain things that you want to be able to control quickly, especially during a performance, then having those extra buttons gives some pretty significant capability increase to the base PAM. Oh, thank you, Afterlife. Yeah, I really like teaching this stuff, and it's one of my motivations for doing these streams is an opportunity to teach people that are interested in the subject. So I hope I do a good job, and generally it seems to be well received. So thank you. That's the motivation of why I'm doing this, and also just geeking out about this fun hobby that I only know a few people in real life that would be willing to listen to me talk about it. So it's great to have the online audience for that. You asked drum triggers. I missed that a few minutes ago, so I'm not sure in reference to what you were saying that. I guess that was about branches, but yeah, that's generally, I think, the way. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be drum triggers, but that's certainly like a common way. So I did a video maybe a couple of years ago now, where I do kind of like a full sort of class about modular synthesis using VCV Rack, which is the virtual modular environment in software that you can run on your computer. It's very, very popular and is sort of the gateway drug for a lot of people to get into modular. I did about a 1.5, 2 hour video that kind of explains from the beginnings what modular synthesis is and kind of various basic concepts that allow you to make a full piece of music. And we use branches in that video as a way of taking a single trigger signal and splitting it between closed and open hi-hat. So if you just take a 16th note clock that's got a pulse on every 16th note, send that into the input, patch the output A to the trigger of a closed hi-hat, the output B trigger to an open hi-hat, then you're getting some sort of pulse on every 16th note that is keeping the beat, but you get interesting patterns based on whether you happen to get one or the other from the coin flip. And then, of course, you can use the probability control to affect how often you get a closed hi-hat versus how often you get an open one. So I think that's like a really sort of basic use case that that shows a practical use of why you would use something like branches, and also just kind of explains the nature of what it does pretty well. It's always useful when explaining a module and learning it to have audio examples and also visual examples, which and for the visual, that's what this is for. Mordax Data, this little guy with the screen here. I don't actually have the screen turned on, but yeah, this guy. This is an oscilloscope. primarily, but it's got a bunch of other features. And so you can use this to get visual representations of an electrical signal, which is very, very helpful in a lot of cases. So you can use it to look at the waveform of an audio signal or sort of the trajectory of a CV signal, like an LFO or an envelope. And it's very, very useful. I think that, as humans, we have a better visual understanding of the world than we do audio. And so having a visual representation of something we're hearing can be very, very helpful in understanding what's happening, either to just figure it out or in the first place, or to just confirm what we think we know. So yeah, I use this a lot. Sometimes, to help myself understand, but very often it's like a teaching tool in my videos to make it really clear what's happening. Okay, am I caught up on questions? I think so, but absolutely keep them coming. As I said at the very beginning, probably before most of you were here, I had an idea about what to do today, but I'm always more than happy to direct what we do at this time towards what people are interested in. But I seem to have caught up for the moment. So what I had thought about doing today was focusing on Sealegs, the delay module from Intellijel that we just began discussing at the beginning. I always use this as like a very simple send effect, but I want to try using it in a more creative way. I watched some videos about it recently and was reminded of how little I'm using it compared to its capability. So one thing that I don't think I even realized, but the feedback control on Sealegs, obviously at the bottom position of the slider, it's at 0 feedback. And at the top position, it's actually at like 160% of the essentially amplitude of the incoming signal that's being fed back into the input. And so you can self-oscillate this thing. It can actually produce, it's the same way that if you turn up the resonance on a filter all the way, most filters can self-oscillate where they produce an audible tone even with no signal patched into it. This as a delay can do the same thing, because the reason that happens is that you're adding a little bit of signal at the sort of point where that happens, where at least on a filter, the sort of fundamental noise that's being added by the resonance being turned up and kind of boosting a particular frequency is being fed back into the input repeatedly until the amplitude of that frequency builds up. And it's kind of the same idea with a delay, that if the input is increased in amplitude each time it goes through the process, and then that output is fed back into the input, then the sound actually increases in amplitude over time. And so if you crank this thing up to 160%, it's adding amplitude to the signal each time it goes through the delay circuit. So that's enough talking. As I said, it's very helpful to have audio examples of this. So let me take a couple of cables and let's patch the stereo output of Sealegs into channel 1 of our mixer. And I don't think it's important to see the mixer, but I'm just plugging in the stereo output of Sealegs into the stereo input of the first channel of Zermixa, which in turn is plugged into our audio interface. And then I'm going to unmute the first channel, and we don't hear anything right now, but that's because the mix is all the way dry. By the way, let me know like how well you can see the text on the module here. I think, again, as I explained before, I only have one camera, so these like close-ups that you see on one case are just a digital zoom from the full resolution. And I'm not sure how well you can actually read the text labels. So if you can't, let me know, because I will be more careful about explaining what the controls that I'm touching do. But the bottom right knob is the dry-wet mix. And so when it's fully counterclockwise, it's only the dry signal that is sent out of the output. And because I have no input patched in, we're not hearing anything. But if I bring the mix knob all the way to the right, then it's entirely wet signal. So it's only the delay signal that is created by the module, which is output. And if I then increase the feedback, at some point we should start to hear a tone. And if not, then I did something wrong. Yeah, I'm not hearing anything, are you? plugged in here. There we go. So I guess you have to feed it something initially. It can't, I guess unlike a filter, it can't, maybe there isn't, it doesn't work in the same way as I was describing. Like a filter is kind of like, is self-oscillating because there's a little bit of noise that is created by increasing the amplitude of a given frequency. And Sealegs as a digital module is not introducing noise on the feedback circuit by itself. So it needs like some sort of initial sound to get that feedback loop going. So if I turn feedback all the way up with no input, we don't hear anything. But if I increase this color slider, which introduces some degree of noise, then with feedback all the way up, if as I start to bring in that color just a little bit, there we go. Let me bring the sound down on the mixer just so it's not quite so loud while I'm speaking. So now we're hearing essentially the noise that was introduced by this color slider infinitely repeated back through the feedback circuit. So it's going into the delay, it's delaying the signal, copying it, and then sending that signal to the audio output, but also back into the input. And as a result, we actually get a pitch that we can hear. And so I can change the quality of that sound by changing the quality of the color noise. And because the feedback goes to 160% of the input signal, it's kind of like once you get something into that feedback loop, it's there forever, and it will just keep getting louder and louder until you do something to sort of cut the input. So like if I bring the color all the way out, I think this will just keep sustaining forever as long as it's above 100%. But if we pull the feedback down, then without an input, we'll eventually lose the signal. But you can hear that it creates a pitch, right? And the interesting thing is that the time control, which is like how long the module waits before it emits the delayed copy of the input, that will essentially act as a pitch control when we're self-oscillating. And this is again the same idea as like a self-oscillating filter, that when you turn the resonance all the way up so that you're hearing the cutoff frequency, the cutoff frequency then controls the pitch of that sound. Which makes sense if you think about, the way a waveform works. And maybe actually we should plug this through Mordax data so we can look at the waveform. That might be useful. Let me go back to my overhead camera for a second, and I'm going to plug. Let's go to a couple shorter cables actually for this. I'm going to run the stereo output of Sealegs into the oscilloscope and through that into the mixer. So let's see, are these cables going to be long enough? Yeah, they should be. Oops. Get red ones. Okay, so Sealegs out into the oscilloscope, and then let me load up my patch for audio. And let's take a look at the pod. So now we're looking at the actual audio waveform. Yeah. So the green trace is the left channel coming out of Sealegs, and the blue trace is the right channel. And we're looking at a 200 millisecond range, but if I decrease the time, and let's turn it on normal mode, to go much smaller. So there, if I zoom in the time range so that we're looking at a tiny fraction of a second on the sort of x-axis across the screen, then you can actually see the waveform of the sound that's being created. And if I move the time control, that like the delay time on Sealegs, you'll see that it's changing quite literally the frequency of that oscillation. So the closer together the up and down bumps are, the higher the pitch is. And the more spread apart they are, the lower it is. I mean, that's literally what frequency is how often the cycle repeats. And it makes sense, right? Because the delay time is essentially like, how long does it take before the delayed signal is sent out? And so it makes sense that the delay time, when infinitely oscillating like this, controls the pitch. Does it make sense? So boom, there's already something that I don't usually do with Sealegs, is like using it to create a sound without anything patched into the input. And a sound that we can change the pitch of with the time, and we can change sort of the character of it and the volume of it with the amount of feedback and the amount of color. And then another great thing about, I might need to use a longer cable for this so they're not blocking our view. Let's see, there we go. Let me zoom in on the left case again. So another one great feature of Sealegs is that these right three sliders are sort of like the character controls that change sort of the timbre of the audio that it produces. Obviously, we've been using the color slider, which introduces some amount of like noise or distortion or degradation depending on which sort of delay emulation mode you're in. But there's also two filters built into the module. So there's a high pass filter and a low pass filter. And these are inside the feedback circuit, or inside the delay circuit, I should say. So I can bring down this rightmost slider, which is the low pass filter, and the lower I bring it down, the more of the high frequency content is cut from the signal. So this controls the frequency content that we're hearing on the output, but it also controls how much of the output is fed back into the input. So it kind of has a chain effect that it's affecting the feedback circuit as well. And so we can use this kind of, it sounds like filtering an oscillator basically, right? And it's not changing the pitch, it's just changing the frequency content. Right? And so we could modulate this with like an LFO, just as an example. Let's plug an LFO into this control. So I just plugged a bipolar triangle wave from Oct in my other case into the CV input of the low pass filter, and then this little trimmer pot below the jack is an attenuverter. So I turn it clockwise a bit and it lets some of that signal through, and so it's essentially the equivalent of moving this slider up and down by hand. So this could also be an envelope, it doesn't have to be an LFO, but just something to modify the sound. Let's bring the color up to give it a little more harmonic content. And we can again look at how changing these controls affects the waveform. And you can see that the waveform is no longer static, because now that we're using that LFO to change the frequency content, like the actual final waveform that's making its way to data is changing constantly. And then to make this really sounding good, Sealegs has a built-in reverb called fog. It's a very simple control. Like, you don't get any parameters except for the level of the reverb and the decay time. So let me bring some of that in. We'll apply it to the mix. So there's kind of a 50% amount of the fog. Let's turn it all the way up and see what it sounds like. Yeah, it sounds pretty nice, honestly. Like, you wouldn't really be able to hear this clearly if I wasn't modulating the frequency, because it would just be like a constant tone that didn't change. So you, like, let's try turning off the LFO. I'll just fully attenuate it. If I bring the fog in and out, well, I guess you can hear it. The algorithm is able to produce sort of a dynamic enough sound that it does sound kind of reverby and far away, even with like a fairly static signal that's just oscillating forever. But I think it sounds better with the oscillation on the filter, or sorry, the motion of moving the cutoff. Let me slow down the modulation a little bit. Yeah, that's a good question. Can we control the pitch with a quantizer? So, it's very common for self-oscillating filters that if you send a volt per octave pitch signal into the cutoff control, or sometimes a dedicated volt per octave control, you can then play the filter like an oscillator because it'll respond to exact pitches. I'm not sure if Sealegs will do that, but we can very clearly, we can very easily try that. So maybe what I'll do is we'll use marbles, because that has a built-in quantizer. If I send, let's see, is this a long enough cable? Yeah, it should work. All right, I'm going to send the X3 output, which is a CV output, into the input of the time control. And let me increase the attenuator all the way. Let's increase the rate of this thing. Okay, so now I've patched a random quantized voltage into the CV input for the time control, and I've turned the attenuator all the way up so that we're letting the full signal through to control the time. I've got the slider at about 50% here. I'm not sure where. We can try bringing it all the way up so it's the shortest possible time. Bring the volume up. I just realized I still have it at about 50%. Let me know how, again, it's always hard for me to know exactly what you all are hearing to make sure that the audio of the modular is not too loud or too quiet compared to my voice. Interesting. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's tracking to me, because I've selected a kind of subset of a minor scale that should sound pretty in tune, but this still sounds fairly random to me. Let's try this. So I think at this position of the steps control on marbles, we should be hearing just octaves of the same pitch, and we're not. So I don't think this tracks volt per octave, so you can't really play it like an oscillator. Yeah, you hear that distance between pitches? That's not an octave. It's not super far, but it's not like you couldn't connect a MIDI keyboard or something to play this. Interesting that actually, maybe we should use the bar quartet instead. Because then we can actually see on this little keyboard display what pitches we have. So I'll still use marbles as the source of the CV. And let's actually use just the full range stepped random. Let's program in a minor scale. And now if you look at the little sort of keyboard orientation of buttons here, if you sort of turn your head to the right, That's like a low C, and that's a C an octave above. This represents the piano keyboard. So you can kind of see that it doesn't sound like it's in scale. So I think, to me, this is confirmation that Sealegs does not track volt per octave when you're self-oscillating like this. So if you wanted to like create a sound with it and then use it as an oscillator, I think you would have to use a sampler, where you essentially sample it playing a single tone and then use the sampler to do the pitch shifting to change which pitch it's playing. But I didn't know that, so this was a good experiment. It's entirely possible I'm also doing something wrong here, but I don't think so. I mean, if you wanted it just for sound design and like an atmospheric effect, then I think this would be fine. Like I can even, if I reduce the amount of signal that's being let through, just open the attenuator slightly from noon, then we get a little bit of pitch modulation that is not like, doesn't sound like a pitch sequence. It's just like a little bit of variation, like a little drift. And that could be nice for like a drone or something. And in fact, we don't even need these cables for that, because Sealegs has its own built-in modulation source, which is great. Let me hang these cables back up. So these two sliders, rate and depth, control the internal modulation source. Rate is how fast the modulation goes, and the depth is how much of that signal is applied to the primary time control. Yeah, definitely. We can definitely use this to make like a cool drone. Maybe that might be a way to go. Let me slow down the oscillation of this modulation on the filter. But we can definitely modulate the time. So let me pick like a kind of a sine wave. And if I include, you can see these two little LEDs right here. There's a red one and a green one that are kind of alternating. That's a visual indication of the cycle of Sealegs' modulator. When the red light is lit, the signal is negative, and when it's green, it's positive. So the rate that those two LEDs are sort of glowing back and forth shows you the rate of the internal modulator. If I increase the rate slider, it'll speed up. See, now it's faster. And again, when the depth control is fully down, it's not doing anything. But as I bring the depth control up, it will apply that modulation signal to the time. And the more I increase the depth, the more pronounced that will be. Until it's really skewing the delay a lot. And another cool feature of Sealegs is that it gives you direct access to that internal modulator with this mod output. So I can actually, even though there's an internal routing, like this depth control is how much of the modulation goes to the time, I can patch this modulation source to any of the other CVs, like a self-patch. So we can take the modulation signal and use it to modulate the rate of the modulation itself. And then there's different modulation shapes, which are controllable by this knob in the middle. Right now I have it set on like a sine wave, but we can do a square wave. That's cool. I've also got, there's a couple of like stereo effects modes in terms of how the left and the right stereo channel relate to each other. And right now I've got it in the time width mode, where the leftmost slider controls the bass delay time, and then the second slider is an offset for the right channel. So as I bring this up, it's going to delay the right channel an additional amount beyond the left channel. And so we'll start to hear a stereo image with increasing amounts as I bring this up. And we'll, of course, also have pitch effects because when we're cycling like this, as we have discussed already, the delay time affects the pitch that we hear when the feedback is way up like this. So we can actually use this to kind of create an interval where the left side is playing a different pitch than the right side is. Sounds pretty cool. We can also increase the decay time of the fog. I think I had it about 50% more. Let's bring it up all the way. So now we've got the maximum amplitude of delay and also the maximum decay time of the reverb, the fog. I should have mentioned before, but we're also in terms of like these mode switches, which are very fundamental to sort of what type of emulation Sealegs is doing. The left switch controls like sort of the range of the time slider, and we're in the short mode, so all of these delays are very, very short, like, counted in milliseconds, and so they'll kind of create flanger and chorus style effects more than you really hearing an audible repeat. Yeah, fog is reverb. It's a single algorithm reverb with only two controls: the volume of the reverb and the decay time. That's all you can control. So there's no I guess decay time is sort of like I don't know. It's maybe equivalent to like the size control on a reverb usually. Like my Erica Synth's reverb has size and feedback as the sort of primary shaping controls. But it's basically the tail. Like if you send like a pluck into it, like how long do you hear the reverb after the input signal ends? That's what the secondary control is. Let's bring in a little more color. That's cool. It gives us some more harmonics. Another noise source that we can use, or sound source that we can use on Sealegs, is this second to leftmost potentiometer, which is noise. And this is also a sort of multi-function knob. But as I turn this up, I guess it depends on which mode we're in. Let me set this up first. I'll explain what I did in a second. This might not actually be audible. One second. I'm not hearing anything. I may have it in the wrong mode. Let's see. So the noise control can introduce two different types of audio. One is a hiss, which you can hear here. You hear that high frequency sort of white noise sound. Just a little bit of sort of sizzle, I guess. We're low pass filtering this, so some of the high end is cut out. But that's another noise source that we can introduce. And then when you hold the Alt button down, the noise control changes. It sort of crossfades between what type of noise you're hearing, either that hiss or like a crackle. So if I put it in the middle, then we should get like 50% crackle, or I think that's actually all crackle. Let me do it right here. So we should hear a little bit of noise and a little bit of crackle. It may not be as obvious here because I'm in the BBD mode. Let's try switching to tape. So this is a completely different type of delay emulation. So as soon as I flip that switch, we get a very different sound. this is much more sort of alien ambient. But it's very evocative. I actually like this. But you can see how much difference the delay algorithm makes in what sort of sound infinite feedback produces. Let's try changing the offset of the time on the right channel. Let's bring the feedback all the way up. Let's go like fully crackle on the noise. We're also distorting a bit. If you see this red light right above my finger go on, this is a drive circuit. And whenever that red light goes on, that means that the input is actually overdriven or even clipping. Like the brighter the light, the more distortion there is. So turning up this drive, you can hear that distortion coming in. So you can really add some significant grit to that sound. Let's turn it all the way up. It's much more distorted. And Sealegs is super flexible, so you can actually control by holding down the Alt button and flipping this switch in the middle where the drive exists in the chain. It can be either applied directly to the audio input, or it can be applied to the delayed signal created by the module, or it can be applied to the final mix of the dry and wet sound at the end. I think we have it in the input mode right now. Or I guess that wouldn't do anything. We need it on the delayed signal. But if I turn it on to the delayed signal, then you can hear it gets much quieter, because it's not driving the reverb itself. It's driving the delay pre-reverb. But then if I switch it to the last position, now the drive is actually being applied to the reverb mixed with the delayed signal. And so distorted reverb is going to be very prominent. Let's bring the sound on this up because it's kind of quiet. I think it sounds really cool. We could also try different modulation shapes, because we're using a square wave right now, but this has a bunch of different shapes. So let's see, this is like a kind of a sample and hold, like a stepped random voltage. Haunting is a good word. It's like when you're hearing kind of a single pitch with a reverb tail, it's kind of more pretty and just atmospheric. But then when you start to get some of those pitch modulation effects in there, and with a bit of distortion and some of these really low tones, then it can kind of get into horror movie sort of territory where it's like quite unnerving. Yes, you can. There is an input for freeze, because when you hold the freeze button down, it behaves like a shift button, where you get secondary effects of some of these other controls. But if you just tap it, then it freezes the audio that's currently in the buffer and stops accepting new input. And also notably, when you freeze the audio, the filter gets moved in sort of the internal signal chain. So normally the filter is inside the feedback loop, so that it's affecting what amount of the delay is fed back into the input. But when you freeze the signal, it moves the filter outside the feedback loop, so you're just filtering the final sound. And then you can hear that as soon as I hit freeze. Let's increase the amount that LFO is being applied. This also sounds really awesome. But yeah, that's a good idea. Let's modulate the freeze. Let me also get a shorter cable for this little self patch. Just try to minimize the spaghetti here. Perfect. But yeah, let's take get a source for. I guess we can use Pam for a square wave. Let's see, is this long enough? Yeah, I mean, we could just use a 1x signal. So if I turn on the clock on Pam, actually I might want something slower, like maybe divided by 4. And let's unfreeze. So now if you watch the color of the freeze button, it's going to turn blue whenever the delay is frozen. And it's going to keep freezing and unfreezing in accordance with that digital signal from Pam. Let's maybe back off the crackle a little bit. And let's bring in some of the hiss too. So when you use the Alt function on the noise knob, it controls the amount of hiss that you hear versus the amount of crackle that you hear. So at noon, it's entirely crackle, and then turning to either side will introduce hiss, and it's just a matter of whether the hiss is before or after the delay circuit. So if you turn to the left, it's feeding hiss into the delay circuit. So only the delayed signal has hiss audible, which kind of gives us these like little stuttery bits of hiss that come through. Let's maybe change the offset of the right time a little bit more. Sounds awesome. And if we switch the modes on the type of delay emulation it's using, we should get completely different effects too, like we originally heard when we switched to tape mode. Let's try going back to BBD and see what it sounds like. I'll turn the volume down in case it's super loud. So yeah, BBD mode is quite different. And I think this is largely due to the type of sound that is produced by the color slider. This color is kind of like similar to the noise control in that it introduces additional sound source. And the type of sound that it's adding or the way that it's affecting the signal is different between the 3 different emulation modes, tape, DVD, and digital. But talk about alien, right? That's wild. Let's increase the depth of the time modulation. Just go really wild. How cool is that? It's messing with the drive control to change how much overdrive we're hearing in the sound. Because I can see that red light is lit like almost all the time here. So I'm just trying to back it off a little bit. Maybe bring the color down. Ah, yeah, so at the higher range of the color control, it's introducing a lot of sort of constant noise, so we get that kind of constant sound. But as you pull it down a little bit, we're getting kind of more distinct tones. And very different pitches because we're applying a significant amount of that sample and hold modulation to the time control. Try changing the feedback amount too. I have it all the way up right now, 160%. so I wonder what happens if we dial it back a bit. Mess with the color. Yeah, so since we don't have an audio input plugged into Sealegs up here, like all of the sound we're hearing is the result of infinite feedback on the noise introduced by the noise and color sliders. So you can see that as we bring color down, we get much more sort of dead space because this is the primary source of the sound. That's actually cool because when we bring the sort of sound input down a lot, then because we have the fog reverb all the way up, maximum volume and maximum decay time, and we've applied the drive to the end of the circuit so that it's overdriving the mixed dry and wet signals post reverb. We're hearing a lot of that sort of distorted reverb tail just by itself without new audio input, which sounds really cool. Very, very atmospheric, very sci-fi. I mean, this is just so cool that this is all just Sealegs with no audio input. This is exactly what I was hoping to get into today, because like I said, you know, almost all the time I use Sealegs as just kind of a basic end of chain delay. I use different delay emulations between my different songs, but usually it's just like dotted eighth note delay with a very, very moderate amount of feedback. But this is a wildly different use case, entirely from the same module. Yes, the flats is right on this post-apocalyptic soundtrack. Soundscape, yes, well, both really. But yes, after we destroy ourselves with nuclear war, this is what the world will sound like. Well, either nuclear war or climate change, whichever happens first. This is the sound of where the humans used to live. Let's try the digital delay emulation, because we haven't used that mode yet. Bring the volume down because I don't know what to expect. So for anyone watching that doesn't actually know much about delay, because I didn't always anyway, these three emulations, tape, BBD, and digital, are all based on sort of like vintage styles of delay. Tape being like the earliest form of delay, where you were literally recording the input to a magnetic tape and then playing the same tape that you just recorded back some amount of time later to create the echoing effect. And because of the nature of magnetic tape, it has a particular sound that is very popular and has that sort of nostalgic vibe to it. It tends to be like very saturated and kind of have some warbly pitch modulation that makes it sound old. And then BBD stands for bucket brigade delay, which is like an analog circuit where the delay happens by like passing the signal through a number of steps, and at each step, you know, it's called that because it's, you know, a metaphor for like an actual bucket brigade. Like you think of like firefighters, where it's a line of people that need to get a bucket of water from one end to the other, and they're physically handing the bucket to the next person in the line, and each time they pass the bucket, a little bit of water spills out. And it's kind of like that idea that the input signal is getting passed to these individual buckets, and each time a little bit of the signal is decaying, and so you get this kind of fade out and lose some of the, I think generally the sort of the high-end frequency content tends to sort of fall away the more sort of buckets the signal is passed through. And then this final one, digital, is an emulation of like the early digital delays, where it was actually recording into essentially traditional computer memory and allowed for like a perfect degree of fidelity that neither tape or BBD had offered heard before, where the signal doesn't degrade in any way over time unless there's a problem with like the digital circuits or just the quality of the analog to digital conversion. So it tends to be closer to sort of a more pristine replica of the original input. But in this case, the color slider introduces sort of like digital artifacts that we might associate with like an audio file that is at a low sample or bit rate, where it has these very distinct digital artifacts of kind of the modern computer era. Hey Roman, thank you very much, I appreciate it. I designed it myself, so I take credit for it all. We're just listening to Sealegs doing some crazy sound effects. Today's stream is all about using Sealegs for something other than an end-of-chain bread-and-butter delay. And we're using it for some alien post-apocalyptic sound design. Trying out the same settings with the 3 different emulations of delay. Alright, I'm going to go back to BBD. Because another thing I would like to explore with this is like Karplus-Strong synthesis, which is something I know about, but I haven't really done much in terms of patching it up myself. So I'm going to reset all of this stuff to sort of baseline settings. I'm going to unplug all of these controls, or all these patch points. Let's see. Well, this might be a good time to finish my tea because it's. As usual, I never get to the end of my teacup before it gets cold. I'm always talking and distracted. Fortunately, I'm not super sensitive to the temperature of drinks, so cold tea is not as disgusting to me as it is to probably most tea drinkers. If there's any true tea aficionados out there, I apologize for drinking cold tea in front of you. Okay. So let me bring the noise out. I want to try Karplus-Strong, which is a synthesis sort of algorithm, I guess you could say. And it's the way it works is you send a very, very short audio signal into a delay, and then you send the delayed sound into a filter, and then you feed that back into the input of the delay. And the result is that you get sounds that do a fairly good emulation of physical instruments, especially strings and drums. So what I'm going to do is, let's go to the full zoom out for a second. I'm going to take, what should we use? Maybe I'll use Taurus Iteratosilia, which is this drone oscillator that I really like. And this just has a single mono output. Let's plug that into the input of Sealegs. And we're hearing right now just the sound of the Taurus oscillator, completely dry. Let me move the drive to the front of the circuit so that the drive is applied immediately after the input before the delay signal. Let's give it a little bit of grime for those nice warm harmonics. That sounds great to me. I mean, I could just listen to this forever, just this one tone. I love this oscillator. It sounds so good. Let's maybe patch in a little bit of modulation to Taurus really quickly, just to vary the sound a little bit. So I'm going to, let's just send a few LFOs from Oct into an attenuator. My Lapsus Os. Let me switch to the right case while we're doing this. So I'm taking 3 unipolar LFOs and I'm plugging them into channels on Lapsus Os, which I'm just going to use to attenuate these signals because the Oct and its expander don't have built-in attenuation, so you're getting full strength. I think it's +5 to -5 range signals. And then let's take the attenuated output from these three and stick them into the Blendex controls on Tauros. It's not super important to understand what I'm doing here. I'm just adding a little bit of subtle modulation to the oscillator that we're starting with to make the source material a bit more interesting. So it should change a bit over time. All right. And again, we're applying a full amount of reverb to the final mix of the dry and the wet signal. So if I turn the fog down, we can hear what it sounds like by itself without the fog being expanded by Sealegs. Yes, the module that I'm using for the source of this modulation is the expander for Oct, and the top 4 jacks are unipolar triangle wave LFOs, so they go between 0 and 5 volts. And I'm using that to modulate the B1, 2, and 3 controls on Tauros that I have. These are called Blendex, and Tauros has multiple oscillators. Each has a frequency control and a blend control. And the blend blends between hearing the output of the oscillator and that oscillator being used to modulate the next oscillator in the series. So essentially, you can just think of it as a macro sort of timbre control. I'm not trying to replicate anything precise here. I just want the sound to vary a bit. And so this is essentially the equivalent of turning these knobs up and down in kind of an organic, slow pattern. And then we're applying a bunch of reverb with Sealegs to that bass sound. But what I want to do is I want to just allow little tiny bursts of this sound into the input of Sealegs and not a drone like this. So instead of patching this directly into Sealegs, I'm going to patch it into the quad VCA. And then I am going to patch from the quad VCA into the Sealegs input. And now we just need a trigger signal for an envelope that we can use to trigger the quad VCA. So let's take a clock from Pam. I think maybe 1x is fine. We're at 80 BPM right now. I'm going to send that into the first trigger input of Quadrax, which is an envelope generator. And I've got the rise and fall time of that envelope all the way down. So it's going to be basically instant attack, instant release. I might have to increase the release a bit. And then we're going to send the envelope that this generates into the CV input of the quad VCA. There, you hear that? So that, let me turn actually the fog down. So you just hear a click, right? Because we're sending through a very, very microscopic amount of the Tauros Ateratosalia oscillator. If I increase the delay time or the fall time on the envelope a little bit, we'll actually hear the tone. Right? But I want it to be very, very short because that's how Karplus-Strong works. You just need a little burst of noise. So I want it to be short enough that it works well for the algorithm, but long enough that we can hear sort of a discernible pitch. And now we're going to bring up the mix control. So we're hearing 50% of the dry signal and 50% of the delayed signal. And then we're going to turn up the feedback really high. There, you hear that? Oh, yes. Thank you. I was looking at the wrong case. So what I just did is I plugged in, I'm not sure how much of it you missed. Sorry, thank you, Roman. I was on the wrong camera. So let me just recap really quickly what I just did. We've got like a quarter note pulse at 80 BPM coming into the Quadrax, triggering an envelope. Each time that triggers, it sends a little spike of voltage from the Quadrax into the CV input of the quad VCA, which is gating the sound of the Tauros oscillator. And that little burst of sound is now feeding our delay, the first input on Sealegs. And so I have all the controls basically at their default positions, and we're listening to Sealegs at 50% dry, 50% wet with the shortest possible delay. And as I bring up the feedback knob, we start to get Karplus-Strong, where the output of the delay is fed back into the input, and we get a sort of a tail on that sound. You hear that? Now it sounds like a guitar string being plucked. It's like a very natural, organic sound that sounds a lot like a real instrument. And if you if you've used rings before by Mutable Instruments, which is a resonator, this is the fundamental algorithm that's used in the orange and red modes for creating that kind of string plucky sound. And so the amount of feedback that we use is essentially how long that sound rings out for and some degree of its timbre. And then another important part of Karplus-Strong is the filtering. So after the sound is delayed, you filter the delayed signal before the signal gets passed back into the input for the feedback. And fortunately, that's how Sealegs is patched internally. So like the signal flow is input, delay is applied, any filter that you've set up is applied, and then the output of the filter goes to the output you hear and also back into the input depending on the feedback control. So if I bring the high pass filter down, the cutoff, if I bring the cutoff of the low pass filter down, it will darken the sound because we're reducing the amount of high harmonics that are being sent to the output and the amount of high harmonics that are being used to feed back into the input. So we get this darker, pluckier sound. And I can bring the feedback up a little bit to compensate slightly for that, to make it a little easier to hear. So now with really high feedback, we kind of got this tail that's long enough that the sound never really goes away. But if I bring it down, it fades away more quickly. And if I get it to just the right point, it becomes a pluck that really sounds natural because it dies away pretty quickly. And it becomes inaudible by the time the next pluck comes in. I can add a little bit of drive to affect the brightness of that attack. And then, like we were doing with our delay drones before, the time control now affects the pitch of that sound. And because we're in the time width mode, we can also offset the left and right channels from each other. You hear how the left and right channels are playing two different pitches. So you can kind of find an harmonic or a consonant interval like this for sort of a nice sound. But if you pick a distance between the left and right delay that doesn't create a very consonant sound, you can get something that's sounds a little more drum-like. So all sorts of different sort of sounds can be had by just varying the delay times of the left and right channels. Changing the feedback to change the amount of ring, changing the cutoff of the high pass filter to affect the timbre, the brightness of the pluck. And let's try bringing in the reverb again, because this is all dry. Maybe I'll give it a shorter reverb decay time. And remember, right now we're listening to 50% dry, 50% wet. So we're actually hearing some of the original pitch of the Taurus oscillator that we're using to trigger the Karplus-Strong algorithm. But I can change it all wet And now we're hearing only the delayed sound and none of the original Taurus oscillator. I think this sounds great with the BBD algorithm. It's really well designed for this, just the way it tails off. But we could try it with the other algorithms too, like maybe the tape. It gives a lower pitch and sort of a different quality, but basically the same effect. Let's try the digital algorithm. This has much less of a ring to it, so maybe I need to turn the feedback up higher. Oh, that's really interesting. It's kind of got like a sidechain pumping sort of sound. That sounds really cool. This would go well with more reverb, I think. But I think overall, I think BBD works best for this technique. At least I like the sound of it the best. Now let's try mixing in some of the color. And this is introducing some degradation into the delayed signal, which results in kind of more audible upper harmonics and texture. So it's got that kind of Nine Inch Nails like Swarmatron or whatever that thing is called, that you hear in like all of the Trent Reznor or Atticus Ross soundtracks. That's what it sounds like to me. And it can start to get kind of shrill as you really bring in the color up. So maybe a little, bring the VCF down to account for that. And how about some modulation on the cutoff of the low pass filter like we were doing before with our drone. Let's get like a medium length one. So now I've introduced a bipolar triangle wave to the cutoff of the low pass filter, which is essentially like moving this slider up and down. So we're letting a different amount of the high frequency content through to the output and to the feedback circuit. We could also try sequencing. I'm not sure how this will sound actually, but let me go to my full camera view for a second, and let's plug in a CV sequence, like a pitch sequence, to Taurus, which is our sound source for all of this. So now you can hear how the pitch of the input affects what we hear in the fully wet signal. So even though the pitch of Taurus is changing, like if we go full dry, we don't hear this degree of change in the final output, right? When we go fully wet, after this Karplus-Strong processing, what we're hearing is like the change of pitch in the input oscillator changes sort of the timbre and the harmonics in the ring of the Karplus-Strong sound, but it doesn't change the fundamental pitch of the Karplus-Strong sound. That's determined by the delay time. That's really cool. I think it sounds awesome. Let's bring that reverb back in. And I think something else I want to try here is that one of the other features of the internal modulator is like it's got a bunch of built-in waveforms that you can use for modulation, but it also has a built-in envelope follower. So if I set it to this EF mode, it's got both a positive version and a negative version of the the envelope follower. And if you look at that green light right there, I need to turn the feedback down a little bit to make this more clear. But you can kind of see that that green light gets a little bit brighter. Oh, let me go into the zoom in. I don't know how well you can see that on the camera, but that green light gets very bright right when one of these plucks starts, like when we get a trigger from the VCA, and then it starts to fade away, because this thing is actually generating a control signal based on the amplitude of the input. So what we can do now with this internal routing is if I turn up the depth control, then every time we get a new attack, it's going to increase the delay time in accordance with that control signal. So it's like giving us a little pitch envelope. Hear that? And then the rate control is like sort of the decay time of the... maybe it's easier to see if I do this. If I turn the rate up... Oh yeah, that's much easier to see. So the rate control, when you're using the envelope follower, is like how quickly it reacts to the signal. So at this low point, maybe a little hard to see, but the light stays lit for much longer, because after the sound dies away, sort of like a compressor, it takes longer for it to go back to its baseline. But if I increase the rate all the way up, it tracks the signal very closely, so that it only spikes up in voltage right on the initial attack of that sound. It kind of more closely matches what we hear. And so as I apply that depth, we get that very sharp, very short pitch modulation right on the attack. Yeah, so you could use this for melodies. I think it may have been before the flats. It may have been before you joined the stream, but earlier we tried this out to see when you're using feedback to get a tone from the feedback circuit of Sealegs, whether you can use a volt per octave signal on the time control to track pitches, and it doesn't seem to track volt per octave. So you can definitely change the pitch, but you won't be able to play it in like a standard musical scale. But nevertheless, we can try and just see what sort of sound we get. If I plug in one of these CV inputs into the time input, and then add let a little bit of that signal through. Or really, let's try all of it. So this is definitely changing the pitch, but it's not changing it. You're not hearing like even if I change the quantization on Marble so that it's giving us pitches in the minor scale, you don't hear the minor scale because Sealegs does not track 1 volt per octave signals on its time input. So again, what you would have to do if you wanted to use this sound for a melodic sequence is like sample it and then do the pitch shifting in a sampler. After the delay, no, because yes, I mean yes with the sampler. Yeah. If you want to create a nice sounding pitch sequence from this sound, then I don't think Sealegs can be used to do it. I may be wrong. There may be some technique that I'm not realizing or not aware of that would let you get sort of more specific pitches out of this. That's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, either it tracks 1 volt per octave or it doesn't. So yeah, you would have to sample it. I guess the only thing that I have in my rack that works like a sampler is beads. So we could try that. Let's, for a second, plug this to the output here. One second. Let me plug this in. I'm not sure how well this will work, but it's worth a try. I'm going to patch the output of Sealegs into the input of beads. I'm going to take the pitch CV out of Sealegs. So now, let's just get these all kind of on default settings. So now I'm creating grains from the Sealegs audio using beads. And we can try patching in a pitch sequence into beads, which does track that per octave. It's not exactly what I was describing, but it's certainly something that's better pitched than what we were hearing before. Let's turn this down to baseline. That's kind of cool even by itself. And we can actually add more reverb here too. That applies to the grains. Let's increase the decay time of our input signal. Pitch variation is only being applied on beads now, where we're adding grains on top of the delayed Karplus-Strong sound from Sealegs. This is pretty wacky. I'm not sure I like this as much. Let's try playing the grains backwards. Yeah, it's pretty cool, because we're still hearing the dry signal, right? Because I've got the dry-wet mix on beads at about 50%. So we're hearing that original sort of plucky sound from the Karplus-Strong, but then we're also hearing the grains that beads is creating that are pitched up a couple of octaves, and then also sequenced melodically. So you get this kind of stuttery effect because of the fact that the audio source that we're drawing from are very short bursts. But at higher grain densities, it becomes a little bit more like a little closer to sort of a continuous sound. I'm just changing the density of grains here with this top knob. I think a little bit of this goes a long way, because it's not the greatest sound I would like. I mean, even with the grain size all the way up, you don't really get long, slow sounds because the input signal is so slow. Or, sorry, is so short. We could try making that longer, though. Let's increase the feedback for more decay time on the Karplus-Strong sound. I'm not sure whether I like this better than without beads, but it was an interesting experiment. What if we put a sample and hold module between the delay and the beats, asks in the flats? A sample and hold applying what? What source or what destination for the sample and hold are you imagining? Let's try plugging in the pitch sequence back into Toros, our original sound source. So again, this, oh, I see, you want to sample the actual audio output of Sealegs. I don't think it'll work, because sample and hold doesn't really work for audio signals. It's just, it'll be capturing whatever voltage the audio signal happened to be at the exact moment the trigger happens and just sending a constant voltage at that rate. So it's good for control signals, but I don't think running audio through it into an audio input will be something that's audible, because you won't have any oscillation. Yeah, I don't think it quite makes sense. Because again, sample and hold will create a voltage that you can use for modulation, but you don't get an audio output out of a sample and hold. Nothing that you can hear, because it's a static voltage until the next box source comes in. I mean, I guess technically, if you trigger the sample and hold super fast, then in theory you're just getting a copy of the input signal at audio rate, because it's literally how digital audio works. That you're just taking samples of an analog audio source fast enough that the human ear cannot distinguish that they're individual sample points. So, like if you put an audio signal into a sample and hold, and if you sample it, 44,000 times per second, that's digital audio at 44K. And as you slow down the trigger rate, you're sampling less often, and you'll hear the sound of sample rate reduction, which is like sometimes a desirable sort of degradation effect, but it's not going to change the pitch in sort of a sequenced way, and you're not going to get a new sequence. It'll just kind of degrade the existing audio. On Taurus. And even though it wasn't super melodic, I think maybe having another pitch sequence into the time control of Sealegs, just a little bit of let a little bit of that signal through for a little bit of pitch modulation, but not like a sequence. Might be interesting. And we could also try patching a copy of the modulation generated by Sealegs into one of its own parameters. Like maybe into the drive. So in addition to sort of making the time control jump in response to audio signal, we also apply additional drive. You can see the red light flashing whenever a pulse comes in, because we're applying that same envelope signal to the drive, which will distort the input right before it hits the delay circuit. The amount of that with the aux CV trimmer over here. So maybe just add a little bit of it. How about some more reverb? just go nuts and make this sound all far away and washed out. We could also introduce noise from Sealegs. Bring that filter cutoff a little higher so we get more of the high-pitched frequency content. More feedback. It's definitely an interesting sound. Okay, well, we've hit the 2-hour mark on the stream, so I think for me it's time to wrap this up. But I had a great time on this one. This is exactly what I had hoped to explore, of using Sealegs for some things that I never use it for, and really exploring a lot more of its feature set. And also, in the first half of the stream, answering a lot of questions and chatting about our favorite topic here. So as we close out, I will say, as always, thank you very, very much for everyone who is here live during the stream and anyone who's watching it as a replay. My name's Jimmy, and I do these Patch and Play streams every week. I didn't have one last week because I was off. My partner had a week off and we were spending the time together, but generally I'm trying to do these every week. I also do a lot of other videos on the channel in addition to these live streams. So currently every week I'm also releasing a video that's either a musical performance, generally involving modular, and also educational videos on modular and other aspects of electronic music production. So if you are interested in this kind of stuff, I of course recommend you checking out some additional videos. If you'd like to chat more about this stuff outside of the videos, I have a Discord that you can join. Links in the description. It's discord.gg/perceptiesdiscord. And you can also support my work on Patreon, patreon.com/percepties. You can join that for free, and then you'll just get updates about new content that I release. But you can also chip in a few dollars per month to support my work and get a bunch of extra additional stuff, including very detailed patch notes for all of my educational modular videos. You'll be able to download high-quality audio files of all of the music that I post to the channel, and you'll also get additional access to Discord channels that are only available for our Patreon subscribers. So if this is something that you're interested in and you'd like to talk more with me and the rest of the community about this subject, and you'd like to get a lot more content related to this, then I would very much appreciate your support, which helps me to continue to make this stuff. But either way, I'm going to continue doing this because it's my hobby and I love doing it. I have a great time making music with this stuff, thinking about it, talking about it, spending time with the rest of the community that clearly loves it as much as I do. And I really do appreciate the people, especially the ones that have been coming back week after week to hang out with me and enjoy this crazy little hobby of ours. So thank you very much, and I will see you next week. Take care.